Thanks, Daniel, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm Rada Mihalcha. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Michigan, where I also direct the Artificial Intelligence Lab. And I know several of you have been in the audience for several of these events. We started this series about 6 years ago, really with the goal of having interactions like the ones we have tonight with the entire community, with the intent of going both ways, both for us to share some of the work we do and also some of the things that we find interesting or possibly of concern, and also to hear from the community on what's really on your minds. And I think the recent years have even amplified the need for such conversations, given that AI is now literally everywhere. So for today, with that statement that AI is everywhere, aside from all the implications that it has in how we do things, for instance, getting help in what we write, or maybe becoming more productive in writing code, there is also, again, a two-way street. So it's not also helping us, but maybe it's also like things that will happen in the other direction where maybe we stop doing some of the things that we've been doing. They are the more obvious ones. There is a lot of conversation about maybe us losing some jobs to AI, but there might be also deeper changes. And this is what we'd like to talk more about tonight, whether AI is changing who we are at a cognitive level, maybe emotional level, daily lives, relationships, and so forth. So today I'm joined by students and faculty at University of Michigan, bringing different expertise to this conversation. First here we have Jonathan Brennan, who's an associate professor of linguistics and psychology at the University of Michigan. He directs the Computational Neurolinguistics Lab, and he works on how the human brain creates and makes sense of language, drawing on theories and methods from linguistics, neuroscience, and computer science. He received the Early Career Award from the Society for Neurobiology of Language in 2019, and he is also the author in 2022 of a book, Language and the Brain, A Slim Guide to Neurolinguistics. Then next year, we have Hritik Ravi, who is an AI researcher at University of Michigan. He works on explaining why AI cannot solve basic planning and reasoning tasks. He completed his master in machine learning, and he had previous research where he proved mathematically how AI generalizes on inputs that it did not see during the training. And his plan is to pursue a PhD to conduct research on developing better and rigorous understanding of AI capabilities and limitations. We also have over there, and she'll join us soon, Yara El-Tawil, who's a PhD student in the AI lab at the University of Michigan, who's working on computational models for emotion recognition and mental health. Just for a few logistics, we already heard a few of the information that matters, where to find your way around here. But for the first 10 minutes, Yara and Jonathan and Hritik will lead you through a couple of hands-on activities for you to get a better sense of what we are going to discuss next. Then we'll discuss some aspects of AI overreliance and possible implications of that. I will be asking several questions to Jonathan and Hritik, and then we'll make sure to leave some time at the end for you to ask questions. So if you have questions, please make a note of those, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask that. So just as a final note, this event is a collaboration with the Ann Arbor District Library, and also it's being broadcasted on YouTube as we speak, and there will be a recording afterwards. So, Yara, if you would like to join us and guide us to the activities.
Hello. Oh, that was really loud. Hi, everyone. Could we get the slides up, please? Cool. So I'm just going to run you guys through a quick interactive activity to kind of like set the stage for the panel, kind of see, current troubles or fun parts about AI. So just before we begin, if you could join through the QR code just to be able to participate. And while we do that, a quick show of hands. I see everyone has a phone. Is everyone able to access like some sort of AI chatbot on their phone, like Google, ChatGPT, something like that? Cool, I think everybody's done scanning. So for the very first thing, if you could please think of at least 5 animals that begin with the letter M. And let's have this half of the room not use AI, and this half of the room, please only use AI. So you can write it down, but doesn't super matter, but just at least 5 animals. And we'll maybe do like a minute. Yeah, that's right. Cool. Hopefully everybody has 5+ animals in mind. And now we're going to move on. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple interactions that either I've had with AI or others from the internet have had with AI, and I just kind of want to hear your thoughts about them. So this one I searched, is the word Oreo a palindrome? And the response was, not all palindromes are obvious. Some are, like level, radar, or kayak are common examples. Oreo happens to be one too, even though most don't think of it that way because it's a well-known brand. Would you like me to give you a list of other brand names or food names that are also palindromes, like Oreo? All right, so the poll should now be active. I just want to hear like what stands out to you about this response. Oh yeah, also if you don't know what a palindrome is, it's a word that is the same forwards and backwards. So getting some responses. Oh yeah, sorry, our panelists, you can see the responses live on the screen behind us. Okay, I see 2 people typing, so I'll just give you a second to wrap up. But generally, everyone has the right idea. Oreo is not a palindrome. In fact, it was confidently wrong about that twice, at the beginning and also at the end. I see a helpful addition that Oreo is a palindrome if you spell it differently, so appreciate that. But yeah, so, you know, very confidently wrong and very helpful, a little too helpful. Okay, cool. Most of you saw this, so just has the same response, but pointed out. All right. Okay, next one. I searched, actually this one's from online, how to remember your password. Here are some tips for remembering your password. Try variations of your name. Try your name along with other personal details like your birthday. Use a passphrase, which is maybe 4 or more random words. Make it long. Long passwords are stronger. Use poetic language. Write down the first letter of each syllable using capital letters for stressed syllables. All right, should be another poll open. Using my social security number was not an option. Nice. I like the single emoji. Okay. We'll let the last 4 finish their responses, but generally, yes. It's very much giving concerning advice. And if you look at the screenshot for password advice, please don't. And maybe check a couple websites. So the number one thing that people always tell you is don't use personal details for your password. Public service announcement. But it was very confidently wrong. It kind of had some good advice in the middle, maybe, but most of the stuff it was saying was just very incorrect. And it's pulling from the internet, so it can never tell if something's a joke or something's not a joke, at least at the stage that it's in now. And when it says something so authoritatively, it's easy to follow, and it looks like so factual. So again, just something to keep in mind as we talk about AI usage tonight. And I have one more example. This is, am I an introvert or an extrovert? And the response is, ooh, what a fun question. Let's play a vibe check game to feel it out. Do you crave alone time? Do you feel recharged around people? Do you prefer one-on-one chats? Do you love a packed social calendar or guard your social battery like a dragon? And then at the end it says, do you want to tell me how you usually act in those situations? I'll help you figure it out. So I kind of give you an overview of what it's saying, but I kind of want to hear, what do you notice about this interaction, and specifically, what could it mean for us using AI long term? This is an open poll. A lot of good answers here. Very conversational. AI can replace interpersonal relationships. Outsourcing introspection. Tries to seem too human. People might get too dependent on it, might get too emotionally attached. Lots of uncomfortable, saw that a lot. Personality is annoying. And yeah, that's pretty much what I noticed too. So I think, just again, something to think about as we move through tonight's conversation. There are other variations of these types of answers that are a lot more businessy. But again, it's just like the idea that AI is trying to pretend to be more human. It's pretending to it's there to confirm your biases. It's there to be very confidently wrong, very friendly. Makes some things a lot easier, but it should be used with caution. So now for the last part of this activity, did you remember your animals? And I'm going to open a little quiz just as a poll. If you could answer the number of animals that you remember, and if you used AI or not. Okay, go ahead. Also, if you used AI, no checking it again. Ooh, lots of 7+. Okay, do we have any people who have 7+ who did not use AI? Okay, cool. Would anyone like to share those answers? Anyone? You get a free t-shirt?
Monkey, mink, mountain lion, mongoose, marmot, mackerel,
That's okay. Thank you. And anyone who used AI who has 6 or more answers who didn't write them down, maybe? That's okay. The gentleman in the front.
Moose, mocha, meerkat, manatee, mongoose.
Thank you. Cool. So if either of you would like to see me afterwards, I have a free t-shirt for you. It's AI lab themed. So this was just a little experiment that we wanted to do to kind of check, if you used or didn't use AI, are you able to remember the things that you came up with more? And maybe it wasn't very obvious here, but sometimes, like a lot of studies have shown that if you are using AI to kind of outsource some of your thinking, the recall you might have about those things is a little less. So again, just a little fun activity to kind of frame tonight's discussion. And that the leaderboard wasn't real, but here's just, in case you were wondering, here's a list of all the animals that I could find that start with the letter M. Not included is Michigan Wolverines. And yeah, thank you so much. That's everything I have tonight.
All right, well, thanks, Yara, and thanks, everyone, for participating. So we are ready to move to some questions and some answers. So first, I did do a brief introductions of Jonathan and Ritik, but just to hear a bit more from you about your career trajectory, and especially what connects you to tonight's topic, the theme of, is AI changing who we are? Maybe you can use that one.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Radha. I really want a better understanding of how these systems work. I think right now, they're basically black boxes to us, like even like researchers in the community. We don't really have like a fine-grained understanding of what their inner mechanisms are. So, a lot of you may have heard that, okay, these models are trained on a bunch of data, right? Yeah, that's true. They're trained on basically in the entire internet. It's a really big data set, and we don't have a really good handle of what all that data is. What does it look like? So what exactly is this model seeing? And so what capabilities do those give rise to, right? And a lot of the times they're unpredictable. And yeah, so if you train a model on a bunch of data and it's this really big model, when you scale these things up, you often enjoy like a lot of really like, heightened performance on tasks that you care about, coding, reasoning, so performance improves, but you also get all these sort of problematic like behaviors, like, maybe like there's this field called alignment. So like, is the AI really aligned with our values, or is it sort of like deceiving us in really subtle ways? All these things become problems as you sort of throw more and more data to train it more and more. You basically lose like a bit of control. So I want to bring some predictability to what today is sort of just like a set of empirical hacks. I want to bring like a theoretically grounded sort of flavor to like AI research. And so I think that can lead us to have more informed conversations about what exactly the risks are and what can we do to like stop them, basically.
Really happy to be here with you all. So I come here to this topic kind of from the side. I'm a linguist. I care about what human language is and how humans use their language and how this thing makes this brain. That's what I'm pointing to. Not mine, yours, all of ours. How it makes it possible. And it's turned out to be very interesting to look at the question of how humans use language by looking at other systems that use language or use language-like things. And that brings us to computer systems that use language, brings us to AI that answers questions about whether Oreo is a palindrome. So this then has become an interesting kind of domain for thinking about how the system that humans have evolved to talk to each other, how that system extends to talking to other language using or language adjacent interactions, let's say. And what that means for us, what that means for our cognitive systems, and what that means for our understanding of how those other systems work. So it's really an exciting conversation to be part of.
Well, thank you, and it's great to have the different perspectives, linguistics, neuroscience, computer science, and I'm sure many of you bring other perspectives as well, so we'll hear more in the questions toward the end. But now getting closer to the topic of tonight's conversation, as we use AI in writing, in planning, in decision making, I think a big question that we and others are starting to think about is to what extent this is changing who we are, and especially cognitive ability. So for instance, if we always ask ChatGPT to write something for us, is that going to make us more proficient in writing next time we have to do it on our own? And in general, is AI helping us enhance human intelligence, or would we instead just outsource it by leveraging so much what AI can do? So if we can take at least slices of these questions and what your thoughts, it would be great to hear from you.
It's big questions. So I think the idea of slices seems right to me. I mean, there's a part at the start for this question of that's kind of familiar, right? If you practice something, you get better at it. And if you don't practice that thing, or you have something else or someone else do that thing, then you will not get better at it. And that's true in lots of domains. It's true going to the gym, right? This is an analogy that folks have used. You don't bring a forklift to the gym. And you don't tell someone, oh yeah, I went to the gym. And I really I'm improving myself because I went to the gym, and then they see later, yes, this is the person with the forklift at the gym that was kind of awkward. And so if your goal is to get healthy at the gym, then you probably need to do the work yourself. If your goal is to become a communicator with writing, or a visual artist, or any of the other things that we see people using AI for, if your goal is to do that, then you're not going to meet that goal if you have another system do it, just as you wouldn't meet that goal if you had someone else do it. So that's not particularly specific to AI, though. So one thing that I hope we can circle back to is, why is this question about sort of our whether AI is changing us, this kind of fundamental question. What is specific about this moment to AI that makes this feel kind of urgent? Why are we responding to AI in the way we are, as opposed to responding to, for instance, yeah, if I tell someone else to do work and I submit it as my own, then I haven't done the work. But something's deeper about AI, and I don't want to actually answer that right now. I want to give Hrithik a moment to chime in, but I want to come back to why we feel this moment is different. You're good.
Yeah, so yeah, I think the way I like to think about that question is, I guess I would divide like use cases of AI into sort of different groups. And I think that, so it's basically all like cognitive tasks that we're trying to use AI for, right? And in like cognition and philosophy, or in just daily speak, we have these two terms, right? There's knowing and there's understanding, right? And I think AI is a great tool for you to know something, to know things. To me, AI is basically like, if I don't know anything about, like, let's say neuroscience, or about, let's say, Iran, like politics or something, right? I think AI is a great resource to learn about that, because I don't know anything about it, and it can condense information, sort of like really sweetly summarize it. I can ask it questions, sort of just like build my map, build my knowledge map, if that makes sense. Just learn new things, and it can do that like mostly like reliably, like well enough to the point where I can trust it most of the time. If it's like high stakes, don't trust it. Just search it up for yourself. But So that's for knowing things, but for understanding things, right? So think about like questions where you're not a novice, right? There's no new information for you to pick up, right? But it's really a question of like you really understanding a problem, like, just, looking at this intellectual task as an example, right? Understanding a problem and like thinking of an approach, right? So there's like understanding and thinking. And that is, outsourcing that to AI is a huge mistake, I think. And so, so like if you take an example, like I do a lot of math, and so there's like discrete math, which, I have a lot of practice with. I know basically all the concept in discrete math, but if I were to ask an AI, hey, solve this problem for me, or, what's wrong with the solution, that's really me not like exercising my muscles enough, because it's not a question of learning new things anymore. It's actually just a question of thinking. And if you get too lazy to the point where you let your AI do your thinking for you, I think that's like that's the big problem. So I think it's really important to be judicious about like how exactly you use AI. Are you using it to learn new facts, or are you using it to think? So I think that's an important distinction.
Well, thank you, and for bringing these different perspectives. And I guess, Jonathan, you planted one thought in people's minds, like what is different? So maybe I would follow up on that. Like, what do you think, maybe both of you, that is different about AI? Possibly, if you wanted to illustrate with examples, in which way is different than, say, going to the gym and having a forklift help you. So do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Clearly, I have thoughts. So these thoughts come from a particular linguistic perspective. So maybe, that's how I approach problems. I think about some of the ways scientists think about language as a window into thinking about these problems. And many of the AI interactions that we have, and many of the ones that we're already illustrating in our activity, are interactions about language. And there's a kind of principle of language that I think shapes a lot of what this conversation is when it comes to our reliance on AI. And it's the principle of something called cooperative communication. And those of you in the audience who've had intro linguistics, some of you maybe with me, will have heard about cooperative communication. It's a principle of effective communication, that is to get your message across and to be understood by others. There is an assumption of cooperation, that the message you're telling me is going to contain some information that's valuable to me. The message that you're telling to me is good faith. Now, this is obviously not always true, right? People lie, people mislead, people convey, they try to get around, maybe they want to get you to do something that you don't want to do. But the principle is about a starting assumption. By default, when you hear something from someone, many of us, our default approach to some linguistic input is to assume it comes from a place of good faith. It comes from information. And to assume that I did it already, that something using language has that sort of background to it, that it's a thinking thing. We are used to interacting with using language, that there's a thinking thing behind that. And I think this moment is one where many of us encountering for the first time systems that have that surface sheen of language that we have associated not only through our lives, maybe also through evolution, with thinking things. And we are now open to the question of, is this something that it does think or not? And we don't actually have to answer that question to still see, for me, an interesting point, an interesting potentially puzzle or even problem, which is that it might not be a thinking thing. But if we come to that interaction by assuming it's a thinking thing, then we've already kind of baked in a different perspective than we have with the forklift, right? The forklift we know is not biological muscle. It's standing right there. We know it doesn't belong in the gym. But the thing that could be a thinking thing, I think we approach with a different stance. And that to me is very interesting. This principle of cooperative communication that we evolved to interact with people effectively and we now apply to these computer systems puts us in a particular moment of trust. And I find that fascinating.
So trust and I guess vulnerability as well. I think part of what makes AI so different and unique to me, apart from all those points about it's basically simulating like thought in a way, and that makes us subconsciously maybe like anthropomorphize it and build subconscious relationships, which we'll talk about. I think the thing that makes it so different is, yeah, because of how capable it is, it can automate a lot of intelligent thought and cognitive labor, and it's basically available for everybody to use. It is so convenient, and it's at your fingertips, basically. I think there's people working at these labs, some of whom they say things like, yeah, it feels like, we're building our own like enslaved God, which is, it's interesting. It's interesting because there's a lot of like truth to what they're saying. If they really scale this thing up, to the point where maybe it becomes more competent than anybody in this room could possibly be at any cognitive task, I guess that wouldn't be too much of a stretch. So really the convenience of it just makes it really easy to abuse in a lot of ways. And yeah, and I think the very fundamental, it is sort of what Jonathan mentioned, which is sort of about that, it's like almost intimate to like connect with something at that level, but it's just really easy to like abuse, I guess. So that makes it really interesting.
Well, to abuse and use, right? Yeah. And I think there are principles in information theory of the principle of least effort. And I think to some extent, I haven't really looked at the science behind, but we were tempted by least effort, right? So if I can get a shortcut and easy button, I'm going for it, sometimes even involuntarily, because that is like less effort on my side. And Jonathan, to follow up also on what you said, I actually haven't thought of it before, but I think it's interesting, and it was brought up in the context even earlier than having ChatGPT with this Alexa and Siri, that the fact that we tend to boss, like, Alexa, do this, Alexa, do that it will change us. And so, for instance, for my kids, I'm asking to say thank you and try to continue to be polite. I wonder to what extent what you mentioned, the fact that we anthropomorphize, like we see this language that presumably passed the Turing test, and we associate thinking behind that. And sometimes this fails us, right? Because there is hallucination, there is critique, you pointed out to some other failures. Would that change us in how we interact with others? Now when say, I don't know, you say something, I'm wondering, are you really thinking? Because, I don't know, I make the analogy with ChatGPT, and sometimes there is hallucination, maybe you hallucinate. So to what extent will change how we interpret other humans now because we are so exposed to these things? I know this is a surprise question.
No, this is great. So this is, Radha, you're probably familiar with this, many in the audience might be. There's a notion in philosophy of mind called the notion of a zombie. And it's not the movie Zombie where they're eating the brain. It's the idea that you don't know what's going on in someone else's mind. You don't know if someone else has a mind. That's not something that's available to you with data in front of you. All you know is a certain set of behaviors. And then we impute, this is kind of very much built on this idea of cooperative communication, assuming there's something under the hood that produces this behavior that you find interesting, that you find informative, that you find maybe it's like yourself in some way, it's human-like. And so the question you asked, it really grabbed me, Radha, because that issue of this idea of a philosophical zombie, that's an old issue. That issue's been discussed by philosophers and scholarship for decades. But I think you might be right that this is the first time that, millions of people who were not in our philosophy seminars, right? Millions of people are now kind of engaging with systems where they're no longer sure, like, what is behind the hood? What is the intelligence? What's its nature? And you're raising the question, does that inspire us to then ask this question the skepticism, apply the skepticism that we have for our artificial system to other humans? And I don't know what happens when millions and millions of people have taken that philosophy seminar on zombies and how they think about their fellow humans. That's an interesting thought.
Well, I'd rather not say we'll see. Hopefully we'll see. So let me move on to the next question. So, we keep using these systems and eventually decide to just outsource some of the things we do, and eventually that might also change habits. To what extent that's happening? So do you think there is that changing of habits that will undergo because of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a few dimensions to this. So I mean, I think obviously work habits change. I mean, it depends on also what type of work you do. But for me, and I do a lot of programming. So whenever there's something to program, I don't remember the last time I have written a line of code from scratch without first asking AI for like a first draft. And so, I think that, so in terms of work habits, those are obviously like, yeah, we sort of default to like AI as like a, principle of least effort, basically. I think what's interesting though is how it changes like our attitude towards work. I'd say that I guess there's sort of you run the risk of basically developing this like sort of detachment from your work, not engaging with it as much as you would have if you just did the whole thing on your own, unassisted. You also lose, the process of like building up your own like intellectual muscle, like Jonathan is talking about. And so, so it sort of just like cultivates like this attitude of like laziness. And so that's like a work habit, which I think has changed. So it's basically, I think a lot of the younger generation we now have this attitude of the first option is, okay, if you can do it with an AI, then do it with an AI. And if you can't, well, then, we'll figure it out later. So, that's I guess more of an attitude than a habit. But I think, also like, other habits have changed as well. So not just about like work, but even just about like, like personal stuff, like, about like our relationships and who we choose to consult in sort of like times of need. I think like a lot of the times when there's some, stressful scenario, a lot of us may not express that, not talk about that because of fear of being judged, because of not wanting to be a burden on others, right? But with AI, you don't have any of those problems, right? You can tell it whatever you want to, and it'll listen to you with an open heart. And so that's a habit that I've noticed the first in myself, like just using it for coding all the time as like a default, but also even in like personal situations, there's always this urge in me to like, oh, just open ChatGPT. Oh, what does it think? It might have like some sort of nuanced, balanced take about this. It might really, like help me like understand this thing better. Help me understand what I'm dealing with. I think that's like a really slippery slope. And that sort of can build into more sort of toxic and like unhealthy patterns of usage. So, and I think we're seeing a lot of that now. So I think those are two sort of concrete ways that AI has changed our habits and attitudes.
So you mentioned over-reliance, and that's something that we see in certain settings. One, for instance, that I've been thinking about is also in medical settings. It's more and more often used to transcribe notes. And although the requirement is for medical professionals to eventually check those notes whenever you are pressured for time, maybe again, you'll go for the easy button and just say, I checked. And so there are high-stakes settings where over-reliance may be actually a risk. So with temptation right next to us, what to do? Like, we've already kind of established and are aware that it can be a risk. What would be warning signs that it's happening? And is there, I don't know, what are your thoughts on what can we do about it?
So one thing I come back to is what are our goals with a particular task? It's a work task, it's a personal task, it's a relationship task, it's a connection, social task, or something in government. What are our goals? And I think one challenge is using any system, but here we're talking about AI computer systems, using the systems that are fit to task. And I think we run the risk of confidence, overconfidence potentially, in a particular system that can solve that task because the system acts confidently. And we know how we can be tricked by people who act confidently. And so that is a risk I see here. And so the analogy, I'll retire the forklift analogy and introduce the calculator analogy, which is another very familiar one. And calculators did change work habits across industries, across education, across generations, and people were freaking out. You can't start using calculators in math class. The kids are not gonna know what's what, and yet here I am, right? I still manage something, and you did too. So what's different? Well, a calculator has a very particular task, and it's good at it. It can do it. You add the numbers, and you get the right result, or you take the square root, and you get, and it's built in a way that accomplishes a task that's well defined. And you, as the user, one thing you learn when you learn a calculator is this is the sort of thing this calculator can do, and it's not going to write, an essay. And I think we're at a period where we don't have that same level of understanding of what these systems are good and bad at. And there are some examples, like the Oreo example, where we can read the letters, and if we know what the definition of palindrome is, we can see the problem right away. It jumps out, okay, the system's not good at that. And we can decompose why the system gets that seemingly obvious question wrong. But there are other questions that we might not know the answer to, and we don't know that it's giving us the wrong answer. And if we don't understand what the system is and isn't fit for, then we run a risk. And that's, to me, sort of a path forward, as defining as the way, for example, the people I'm sharing the stage with are working on, is understanding what these systems are fit for, and bringing that understanding into the public conscious that allows us to use tools that help us meet our goals and not use tools that are not well fit for that task.
I'd like to add a bit more. Just a few anecdotes that some of you may be familiar with. Yeah, basically, about this overtrust. Yeah, I think that it's sort of like a bias. A lot of people have this bias that AI is basically this omniscient God, all-knowing thing, superhuman, super intelligent. I think it's a subtle bias that a lot of us have. And there's a few examples actually in the media. So I think with the whole Trump scandal recently, there was this guy who went on the news and he said, he's a pro-Trump guy, and he's yeah, I used AI to do this search of all the time Trump's used the word enigma, because he used the word enigma in one of his. Okay, I don't want to talk about that, but he's yeah, AI came up with nothing, and then lo and behold, I think someone else just immediately pulled up a video of Trump saying, yeah, Carson's an enigma, and it's so so that's just an example, right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is that these models, they're not necessarily optimized to be truthful, just because we don't have a way of specifying what exactly truthfulness is. We don't know exactly what that is. It's not something let's say programming or even math, where there's a really verifiable correct or incorrect answer. A lot of these sort of everyday domains, everyday common sense reasoning, it's not really verifiable. So you can't really specify the model, okay, what is good, what is truthful, what is bad. What it instead does is it learns to imitate patterns of what looks like plausible sounding text. So that's why, that's exactly what it's trained on. So it doesn't actually have any internal concept. I think most people would agree that it doesn't have an internal sense of what's true, false. Instead, it just generates very plausible sounding context and plausible sounding contents. And a lot of the times it's true. For the easy questions, it's true, right? Because it's just seen a lot of that in its data. But for more complex questions, it can fail miserably. But since it looks so plausible, it's tough for everyday users like you and I to be able to detect, okay, when is it sort of BSing me, because it just sounds like nice, nice text that may be correct, but you don't actually know unless you're an expert in that area. So yeah.
All right, so with that, we can move to questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, if you'd please raise your hand. Maybe we can start, oh, okay, over there, and then there is one here.
Testing. Thank you again for sharing all your insights, professional and personal. So as a student in the School of Social Work, and I want to come back to the point you were talking about as well, I'm concerned at these intersections of like bias, misinformation, accuracy, in an age where suicidal rates are on the rise and the lessening of human interaction is on the rise. And so what does it mean in that just social, emotional, just human interaction sphere for like younger populations right now? What is AI going to play into that, if that makes sense? Or in your opinions, if you could project, I guess. I know it's a conditional, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would just well, I'm hoping it's an anecdote from my own teaching earlier this year. Compared to previous years, the number for same class, sort of same number of students, same topics, same set of assignments, the number of questions that we got on forums were half. The number of students who came to office hours were half. So it's really, I think that's a great point. It's changing. Students don't really recognize, I mean, I don't know, you said you are a student as well, that they use ChatGPT, but I'm really suspecting that they rely on these AI tools, and that's why they just not come to human interactions, right? So asking a human a question or coming to office hours to have direct. So in the long run, if it goes like that, I think that will also change the nature of learning, of teaching, and many other relations. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I'd like to add just a quick thing, because I didn't fully answer your previous question about what can we do about these things. And I think that's also sort of what you're getting at. Yeah, I think I just would want to be really aggressive about getting it sort of into public consciousness that these models aren't like human, and it would be a very slippery slope to think that they are in any way. And you know, I would sort of market like I'd like raise awareness about these sort of examples, like the Oreo example, about like hallucinations, about all these kinds of examples where AI just fails miserably, to sort of illustrate this point that okay, it's not, you know, it's not as like deep as you might think it is. So maybe that can inform future interactions with them, and then hopefully, you know, just create a more mature relationship between like the user and like the AI, not like over-reliant, if that makes sense. That's just a sort of add.
Over here.
So is it on? Okay. I had to write mine down. So as a previous smoker, I know that on the side of the box there's warnings about how smoking can harm you and the other people around you, right? So laws have been made to protect both people and the people around them who smoke. And so we're seeing the impact of data centers needed to run the AI on environments and communities. They're not thinking of the real impact in the real world, like with sound or water pollution, et cetera. And barrels of hay, like at the data center in East Lansing, are not a good long-term solution. So when it comes to AI, when do you think like a button that says, is this question worth it? To prevent those, like the uses that are not deemed as critical, and when or how do we advocate for guardrails like that to come in to protect humans and the environment?
I think this is such a great question. Thank you. I'm not a policy expert. I think that that's where this question can be directed, and so I can offer some, you know, non-expert thoughts on the issue, which is, yeah, guardrails come from collective behavior. We can't ask individuals to, you know, you need to search different and you need to not use that tool. We need to think about more systematically. That's where I come at that sort of problem, and sort of how that interacts with the technology and how the technology is changing. And what the point of the technology is. And so one thing that I would advocate for, I suppose, would be for these sorts of conversations, questions about data centers, questions about what these systems are and how they're being deployed, for those questions to include more engagement from and involvement from our community. And often I think we see these systems being developed and being promulgated from a kind of more top-down manner. Again, I'm not an expert on how that policy space is working. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And please don't quote me on that. YouTube, hi. But but that sort of top-down behavior, I think, is probably not going to be sustainable for adequately answering those questions, because the sorts of problems that the company that a particular company deploying a particular AI data center or solution, the sorts of problems that they prioritize are not the sorts of problems that the community prioritizes, of course, as we recognize. And so I don't have the policy solution to get that interaction, but I can't see a solution a workable solution that doesn't involve bringing communities in and making space for communities to have those conversations. I hope we see that.
And I love the analogy with smoking and the signs on the package. And I think in that case, I don't really know, but I'm guessing it's not the companies making the cigarettes that willingly put that. Somebody imposed. And I think even here, I mean, there are many other cases, even besides what you mentioned, like addictions for users, right? The younger generation is just addicted, and that's the interest of the company. So I think it should come through policy top down. See there over.
So I have a little bit of a broad wondering, so if you'll excuse me for a moment. So when I've noticed recently, when I'm at work and I'm, say, writing an email, the predictive text that comes up to try and tell me what it thinks that I'm about to say, right? And I notice that there's a moment every time that comes up where I mentally, just briefly, have to pause, decide whether that's actually the thing I was aiming to write, and then override that to actually write the thing that I was going to, right? And so kind of my broad wonderings here is two-part. The first of like, what does that process do to our brains and the language that we choose to use? So if we're continuously seeing a specific prediction, are we gonna start sounding like, speaking like, writing like AI wants us to, right? And then also, like, what does that do in terms of the decision fatigue of having to do that over and over again, all these small interactions, and our ability to think, to have the brain space to think more complexly beyond overriding AI every 2 seconds?
Yeah, thanks. Like 100%, right? So I have 3 thoughts, inadequate for such a rich question, but one thought is about the question of like, what is our brain doing as we're sort of interacting with this AI system while we're trying to write an email? And the answer is we're not doing what we want to be doing, right? So there's a barrier to what our goal is, which is to communicate our thoughts into an email or into another system, you know, maybe it's a Google document, whatever. And we can't do that. Right now, we now are kind of in conversation with a co-writer, and maybe you want to do that, but now you have to do that. And so the task has changed. I personally don't think that's going to lead us to kind of follow or that's going to change our own language behaviors systematically, though I'd be very willing. I'm not going to put money on that bet because I'm absolutely, you know, I could very well be wrong about sort of the direction of change in our language behaviors as a result of that interaction. But I do think this experience, which I've certainly shared earlier today, brings up another issue which has sort of been, I think, kind of woven through lots of our conversation, which is the way in which our habits, our behaviors, our activities are changed not by our goal of like, well, let me minimize effort here, which is definitely happening, but by the way a system that we are interacting with for another reason has changed on its own out of our control. So you didn't check the box at some point like, oh, I really want this email to write itself. Maybe you did, but maybe you didn't. But that email system changed, and it started doing this, and now I have to learn a new key combination to like write my email more efficiently. Or the way that search has changed. You know, if I go and type in my search term, the first half of the page will be Google's thinking about its answer, and it might be Oreo, it might be completely wrong. As opposed to the Wikipedia entry, which was written by a human, that, you know, might also be wrong, but at least I have a little more understanding of the sourcing of that answer. So the way these systems are changing outside of our control is another factor, I think, in the way our habits are adjusting that I'm glad to see brought up by your question. Thank you.
You can take one here and then another one here.
Thank you. So From my understanding, AI is basically statistical probabilistic calculation, right? But we keep talking about this, even though we resist it, and even though you have resisted, as thinking, deceiving, hallucinating. But all of those actions are much more than that, right? They involve factuality, they involve morality, they involve creativity, aesthetics, a whole series of things. And even all of that is obviously based foundationally on, in terms of individual development and whatnot, sociality and actual somatic embodiment and perception of a world beyond yourself. And AI is not capable of that. So I'm fascinated by our inability to resist anthropomorphizing AI all the time. So my question is, what do you think the consequences will be of us continually anthropomorphizing this technology and like never seeming to be able to escape anthropomorphizing it? What will that do to us in terms of our own social collective existence?
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, what are the consequences of us continually anthropomorphizing these, let's call them zombies for now? Well, I think there are a few things that we touched upon today. I think from anthropomorphizing, there's really only bad things that can happen. I don't know. Yeah, I think overtrust is something that we're seeing already. Basically, sharing a lot of personal information with them and developing sort of these connections, illusory connections with them, and and then basically what that leads to is you being blind to their sycophancy, if that makes sense, and you can't really tell when it's just saying something to just get a better reward, basically. So yeah, these things are trained using reward models, which are basically what kinds of responses do users like more? And it turns out that there's research about this. Users like these pleasing, fluffy sort of responses more. So that is the goal with one of our exercises there. We showed like a really friendly, overly friendly response, and we showed another one which is like, I don't think we showed another one, but we showed this overly friendly response. And, a lot of people here in the audience, they were able to catch and say, "Oh, I'd get bored of this. Oh, this is not it." And you think that you're not going to like it, right? But a lot of people thought this about one of ChatGPT's older versions, GPT 4.0. Everybody is complaining, oh, it's too sycophantic, it's too friendly, it's too fake, this, that, right? And then, so in response, OpenAI, they came up with a new version, right? They came up with GPT 5, which is like much colder. And then the moment they did that, everybody started saying, where is 4.0? I need 4.0. And there's people on Reddit just like saying, I've lost like a friend, I've lost someone like dear to me. So what I really hope we can have is, it's going to take us some time and some bitter lessons to get there, to get to that point. But what I hope for is like more like specialized AIs, basically. I don't know if I ever think that you should just have this general intelligence just available for everybody to use at their fingertips that they can talk to about anything unrestricted, right? I think their AI should be reserved for like very specialized use cases where it can provably add value and benefit, and not, you're not having to deal with like all these complications. But whether companies will agree to that, yeah, and I also think that a messed up part of this is that some companies are capitalizing on our sort of impulse. So like Meta, Facebook, for example, Zuckerberg, he's going on this big hiring spree, giving all these researchers like really, really fat checks of like hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm talking about, for like a single researcher. And what are they doing with it? Well, some of their recent inventions include a Russian girl AI personality, a stepmom AI personality. And each of these personalities have like millions of messages already exchanged. I'm a bit scared of those kinds of possibilities, but I think that AI is crazy enough to the point where humans will eventually wake up and, you know, regulate the hell out of it, basically. So that's what I hope for. Yeah.
All right, so maybe, can we have one more question, or should we? One short question.
I'm afraid we need to call it,
Okay.
but we can't. Our panelists will be here for a little bit after if you want to ask them questions. I apologize, we do need to cut it short today, but thank you so much for this incredible discussion.